You're listening to the Breece Creator Podcast. I'm Lee Breece. In this episode, we're going to preview the pilot of the Breece Creator Podcast original series, Ignited, and the topic of discussion is all things instruments. Making them, refinishing them, their history, why don't woodworkers make more instruments, not to be discouraged if you're a woodworker, maker, painter, seamstress, designer, amateur, or expert, there's something in this episode for you. So listen in the entire time for an interesting conversation, great stories, and some hilarious jokes. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and get things started by talking a little bit about the Ignited podcast. So I initially came up with this idea. This is kind of actually what I wanted the Breece Creator Podcast to be, but I decided to do more of something in the traditional podcast sense for the Breece Creator Podcast, because I listen to podcasts all the time and I love listening to them. But to me, being a guy who works in radio, I actually work at a radio station in my hometown. Listening to podcasts, it just sounds so unprofessional, just because there's no jingles, there's no sound effects. It's just guys, they click the record button on a mic, they have an intro, an outro, and that's it. But in reality, I've been kind of doing some research and thinking about it a little bit more. That's kind of what a podcast is about. Not so much being professional, not so much being someone who puts all this time and effort into making something that sounds professional, but it's more about getting information. It's spreading ideas. It's about telling people about what you do, telling your story, trying to get people to kind of feel the same way that you do. And I think that's something that I can really accomplish just by doing a straight up, talk at you kind of format in the Breece Creator Podcast. So I'm really excited to have this episode going. Like I talked about in the pilot episode, we're going to try to have themes to every single episode. For instance, in this episode, we're going to be talking about instruments. I previewed that in the intro. But for the Ignited podcast series, it's going to be all about a specific topic, and it's going to be very informative. It's going to be a show that I put together. Actually, I've been working on the pilot episode for the Ignited series for the last week. It actually takes a lot of work doing research, putting songs in it, jingles, sound effects, trying to sound really cool, be entertaining while also being really informative. So that's kind of where that podcast is going. I don't know how often I'll put one out for the Ignited series. It's just going to be as I find a topic I'm interested in learning about or really passionate about, I'll put it out there. Just for trying to give you a for instance, or something to compare it to, the Ignited series will really be similar to something you would hear on NPR, and that's kind of what the goal of the podcast is to sound professional. So definitely going to try and do what I can to kind of balance the idea of what a podcast is, try to balance what a radio show is. So the first topic in the pilot's actually going to be something that I've kind of been interested in recently, and that is pianos. I actually watched the movie La La Land a couple weeks ago, and I just love all of the piano music in that movie. I don't know why I love the music so much in comparison to other musicals that I've seen or other music arrangements that I've seen, but I just really fell in love with it. I watched the movie probably about 5 or 6 times in a matter of 2 days, so that's how much I loved it. So I really got into this whole thing about I want a piano. I'm thinking about that practically now. It's probably not something I'm going to do right this instant, but I was trying to think at the time about how I want to acquire a piano. I mean, people buy keyboards offline at Walmart, whatever, but I really didn't want to do that. I really wanted something that was going to be I was going to produce the kind of sound like I was hearing in the movie, and so I wanted an actual piano. Now, I am 18 years old. Nowhere do I have any of the money to buy a grand piano or an actual upright piano in comparison to an electric keyboard, so that was definitely not going to happen. But kind of similar to when I wanted a bandsaw, I was trying to think of ways I could do it relatively I want to say relatively cheap, but it's kind of, the way I've kind of gone around that is kind of more, it's more significant. It's got more meaning to it now, because when I wanted a bandsaw, I initially was like, well, what can I do to save up $5,000 to buy a Laguna or a Powermatic or some of the great bandsaw brands? And then I discovered online Matthias Wandel's bandsaw, and I worked on it, and it was kind of really interesting to watch what kind of happened, because I went from someone who made boxes and shelves and was really happy to solve kind of my own problems with woodworking in terms of, being more organized and whatnot, to really enjoying what I was doing and really feeling the power of my hands and my mind and my creativity go into making this bandsaw, which is absolutely really cool. And the other thing about that too is that this bandsaw that I've made is going to be in my family for forever. It is something that has sentimental value to me, and it will for forever. Something that's very special to me, and I think it's more special than if I were to buy a Laguna or Powermatic bandsaw from the store. So going back to the whole piano thing, is that I wanted to actually refinish a piano. So I researched online how people who have researched pianos, actually really surprised, because when I looked up refinishing pianos, there's all these links, all these companies in Indiana. I mean, on the first page in Indiana, all these companies that refinish, rebuild, restore pianos, and there's lots of differences between restoring and rebuilding and refinishing, and that's something we'll talk about actually in the Ignited episode, or the Ignited pilot episode, I should say. So I did that. I looked that up online. It's actually this. I mean, what's really weird is that the people who refinish pianos, rebuild pianos, they don't really fit what I would consider the maker stereotype. They're people who have a really delicate appreciation for music and pianos. And so I was kind of wondering about, well, why don't more woodworkers or makers or people or the stereotype that I'm thinking, I guess, make instruments? That's kind of something that puzzles me. I've never really thought about it before. I just kind of noticed. So I thought about it some more, that you never really hear about a woodworker or a maker making instruments. So we're going to go beyond pianos. We're talking about woodwind instruments, making a clarinet. I mean, you hear about tons of people making guitars, and that might be an exception to the rule, but you never hear about anybody refinishing a piano, or making a saxophone, making a flute, and making all these other kinds of wooden instruments. So I wonder why the woodworking art, the maker art, is such a creative field. I mean, it's built off people's creativity and their ability to use their hands, and that kind of communication between your brain and your hands. So how come that that kind of interest never kind of shared a commonality with being a musician? I mean, me personally, I actually play the clarinet and the tenor saxophone, and I'm also drum major of my high school marching band, which is an incredible experience. There's experiences from that I'm going to remember for the rest of my entire life, and I would never take it back, even if I could get the shot more. So I posed that question to you. I've thought about it some, but to me, it just doesn't make any sense. Maybe because of the opportunities. I know when I was younger, I was really influenced and heavily encouraged to do band and do something art related. The other thing too is that band especially is really associated a lot with STEM. There's a correlation between success being a musician and success in mathematics. So I don't know, maybe the brain doesn't line up like I'm thinking. At the same time, I wonder why that is as well. So going back to pianos, I wanted to refinish a piano, so I looked up the history, looked up some of the great brands, what's happened to pianos, and I really learned that refinishing pianos is really an art. It's something that people really cherish. It's really a big thing. That and pianos themselves have actually gone past their good days, I would say. Now, there's some great, outstanding, absolutely fabulous piano brands today, but in America specifically, there was a huge piano rush in the 19th century. I mean, the 1800s, everyone was buying a piano. There was over 12,000 brands. A huge boom in the center of the U.S. I mean, everyone made a piano. Everyone had a piano. Everybody wanted a piano. Parlor rooms, living rooms, whatever, were full of pianos, and there were tons of players. I mean, you can think of the classic saloon tunes that came out during that time. Scott Joplin especially has some great hits. But once the 1930s hit, the Depression set in, and a lot of those brands, that had become huge brands in America just suddenly died because no one had the money to buy pianos anymore. So what happened was is that pianos kind of became phased out, and all these new piano companies that emerged after the Depression were profit minded, trying to make the piano cheaper, trying to find quicker ways to manufacture it. And over time, since the 40s, the quality of pianos has actually gone significantly down in terms of the popular pianos. I'm not talking about some of the Steinways, Mason and Hamlin, Broadwood and Sons, or some of the great brands of the day. But even today, those brands are still great. I'm talking about the majority of pianos on the market are just pieces of crap. The sound isn't as great as it used to be. The craftsmanship is not as good. And when you have less quality craftsmanship combined with less quality materials, you get a less quality sound. So there's this huge movement going on where people are refinishing pianos from about 1850 to 1930. And so, I looked on Craigslist, trying to find a piano refinish, and I found one. It's a Broadwood and Sons. It's from about 1910. And what's really cool is that the woman who has it knows everything about it. It was made in England and was delivered to her grandmother on a ship. Made it here. It's been in her family for forever, so she really doesn't want to let it go, but she knows that she has to sell it at some point. And of course, I really want to jump on it, but I have not contacted her at all because obviously I'm 18. I have calc class. I have AP Physics. I work. I do woodworking. I do other things, and so I would have no time to work on a piano like that, let alone with my huge project to-do list. And also going to college and having something like that to hold on to is kind of something that holds you back. Like I talked about in the pilot episode, having my dad's huge tool collection has also been an inhibitor, just because it's something that holds you back, that doesn't allow you to move wherever you want to at any given moment and things like that. So being a young person, I'm not sure when exactly I would venture that. But what's cool about it is people are taking things that are hundreds of years old and making them brand new and sound better than anything that's brand new. They're replacing, the original parts, obviously, but like the cases are being refinished, which is really, really cool to see because the designs and the artwork on some of these old pianos is so creative. Whereas if you look at a piano today that you buy, it's just straight wood. There's no design in it. It's just, straight corners, straight lines. If you like that, it's all fine and great, but some of the artwork on these pianos is absolutely gorgeous, and it's such a treasure, such a piece of art to have in your living room if you can find an old piano, not to mention some of the logos of these companies that are on the pianos as well. Something else that's kind of interesting that I learned was that pianos originally were made out of ebony and ivory. Those are the keys. The case made out of white oak, red oak, ash, some of the great woods, walnut. There's some really great designs. Whereas pianos today are made out of particle board. They're made out of the keys are plastic. Again, cheap materials plus less quality craftsmanship equals a less quality sound. These people, they're making pianos mass production, whereas they used to be made, one person would make the entire piano. That's the way they were made in the 1800s. So, absolutely fabulous craftsmanship. But ebony, it's obviously not used for pianos anymore, but ivory was outlawed shortly after the 30s. So, all the keys after that were some sort of other wood or they're plastic. And so what's really cool about these antique pianos is that they have the antique ivory, which is really cool. I've not felt ivory before to know what the difference is in terms of how it feels on your fingers when you're playing. But it's just one of those things about old pianos that's really cool. I really would love to have an antique piano to do that. I want to learn piano too. That's kind of why I got into this, because my entire life I've kind of had this thing nagging at me, wanting me to learn how to play piano. I've always wanted to do that. I play clarinet, I play tenor sax, which is so cool, but there's something about the piano that's so unique, that the sound, the range, the creativity, the possibilities are endless when it comes to producing music with a piano. And plus, I talked about, it's a wonderful work of art. It's a family. It becomes a family heirloom. Just there's so many great things about the piano. And if you listen to the Ignited podcast pilot, we're going to talk about why the piano is so great. A lot of history, a lot of great things there. I suggest you listen to it when it comes out. So I want to give you guys an update, a little bit about what I'm working on. I actually have a client who wants me to make them a guitar. And so that kind of goes back to the whole, why don't more woodworkers make instruments type of thing. But if you go on the internet, tons of people make guitars. I mean, I looked it up online. I mean, there's so many people that make such great instruments. I learned so much just by Googling online and watching 2 or 3 videos. It was so awesome. So I've learned a lot about making guitars. And so I actually went to Northwest Lumber here in Indianapolis this past week. Actually, it was yesterday. And I've not been there before, but I mean, I've heard people in Indy talk about it all the time, and I've heard great things about it. My dad used to go there. I had never been there to know what they had, and I walked in there. And this Northwest Lumber is not just a lumber yard where you get your 2x4s for your houses. They carry exotics. Their motto is from around the corner to every corner in the world. And truly, you walk in there, it's really cool when you're at a flea market or something, you're at somebody's house and you pick up just a small little chunk of teak or lace or zebra wood or ebony. It's almost unimaginable or unfathomable to walk in there and see a whole pallet or multiple pallets of those exotic woods. I mean, I just couldn't comprehend how much Purple Heart they had. I mean, I'm standing there in front of their stacks and it was like $1 million in front of me and I couldn't believe it. They also have some really huge planks that were so huge and they were so cool. It's like, man, if I just had money to burn, I could buy everything in here. They also had some great driftwood, and they had huge burls, also cool. It's like, oh man, how come I've not been here sooner? I personally get all my wood out of the trash. This is the first time I've actually had to go buy wood for something just because this is for a guitar, and guitars are typically made out of alder wood or ash wood. Ash is significantly cheaper than alder, so I went with ash wood, and the reason they choose either of those is just the way the guitar is built, that the wood density really maximizes the sound. So I went with ash, I got my chunk in and walked out. I was there for like an hour. I mean, it could have been 5 minutes. I could have walked in there, gotten what I need, and walked out. But I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Plus, I love listening to the stories and the guys talk about, because this is a family-run business. This is not some corporate company who's trying to profit off of this. I mean, obviously they're trying to make a profit, but it was really cool to talk with them because they want to hear about my experiences and they want to share their experiences. If you say you got a tree that's fallen down or something like that, they'll send somebody out there to cut it up and they'll take the wood off your hands. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. The people there are wonderful, and I can't wait, like I said, until I have money to burn so I can go back and check it out. I would make things out of exotic woods, but my style of woodworking is more purpose over design or look. So there's no reason for me to make something out of exotic hardwood quite yet. I hope to get to that point someday. Not quite there yet. So anyway, as far as the guitar is concerned, I mean, I have a CAD drawing to go off of. I'll cut it off of the bandsaw. This is the head of the guitar. I'll drill the holes and everything for the guitar, and I'm hoping the customer will be really happy, because this is the first time that I've had a client ask me to do something that I've not made before. I've not made a guitar before, but he trusts me and my skill set, and now that I have the bandsaw, I can do that. So I'm really excited to get that going. Hopefully I can work on this as soon as I'm done with this episode. So should be very exciting. I hope I can give you guys some updates on how that's going after this, because there's a lot of parts that go into it. Definitely, it's always fun to start a new project, no matter whether it's something you haven't done before, or if you're going to experiment with something, or you're trying a new material. I encourage you to try something new, whatever you're doing. I mean, if you're a painter, try painting a type of painting you've never painted before. Try using a new paint. If you're a woodworker, just make a project you've never made before, because you'll never learn anything until you try something new. That's kind of what I learned, especially after I lost my dad, is that, yeah, I ruined some of his tools, but I didn't learn anything until I actually experimented with some of them. Now that I have used some of his tools, man, I know what their quirks are. I know what to do and what not to do with some of these tools. And it's just really cool to have that kind of experience and kind of free range with that at the same time. I really hate not having a teacher or, ruining machines. It's kind of I don't like doing that, definitely, but none of them are ruined. They're all fixable. They're all fixable. And that's something I want to iterate to you, is that everything is fixable. Just because something's broken doesn't mean it cannot be fixed. Doesn't mean you have to go out and buy a new one. That's kind of the thing I want to encourage with this podcast, is that you have so much power with your mind and your hands and the internet. Your ability to do anything is absolutely limitless. I mean, with going into the internet in the future, you're going to be able to make, you're going to be able to fix, do anything you want. And I think we're going to go into a society where people can make anything and they know about making anything. They can fix anything, and it's just going to be a complete flip of what it is now, to where people, oh, paint chip on the refrigerator, boom, get rid of it. Motor on the washer quit, get rid of the washer. To me, it's like, you have a perfectly good machine, but just because of one little flaw, you can't fix it. That's absolutely disgraceful. And what's funny is that, me being a woodworker or being someone who's naturally curious as to how things work, it's really funny. It's really, I don't know, I want to say funny. It's actually kind of hard for me when I come across someone who just has no hand skills at all, has no handiness, who doesn't know how to hold a screwdriver or how to hold a hammer, or has no competence at all. It's funny because some of the people that I've worked with throughout my life is that they hire someone to do everything. I mean, from painting a spot on the door to changing a doorknob, to putting window tint on a window, and I'm like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, you can't do that yourself. I am not talking about coworkers. I'm talking about my boss. I'm not saying that is an insult or anything. I'm just surprised that some people just don't have that natural curiosity to be handy, to solve their own problems. That's kind of one of the things that people criticize or stereotype about more well-off, well-to-do, wealthy people. I think that's kind of what I noticed too, because obviously my boss is not someone who's making minimum wage. So if you know someone who's like that, I encourage you to encourage them to pick up a hammer, learn, pick up some tools, fix something, tinker. That's really what the official term with messing with tools is, or messing with anything, is tinkering, because you're not going to learn anything until you try something new. That's what I want you to get out of this episode. But going back to instruments, it's actually really funny because I'm doing all this research for the pilot episode for the Ignited series, and I'm learning about all of these great things about pianos, but I'm also finding some great stories along the way. There's actually some really good stories I actually wanted to share with you in this podcast, just because I can, obviously, and they're absolutely hilarious. So, for instance, there was a piano tuner who decided to post some of their stories online of some of their funny cases of having to go tune pianos, and they're actually really funny. There's this one piano tuner, and they say, I walk up to a house and introduce myself to the husband outside. He seems a little surprised, but tells me to go in. As I play a little concert after tuning the piano, the wife is very surprised. They didn't call me, and I was in the wrong house. It turned out well, though, since they had children who had just started lessons. Here's another one. A client I've tuned many times in the past calls me to set up an appointment. She says no one will be home, just go in. So I go out to the house, and once inside the house, I notice there is no piano. All I can do is tactfully look around. Nothing on the main floor, nothing upstairs, nothing in the basement. So I peek into the bedrooms and still no piano. Later, I call the client, and the client tells me, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you that I got a divorce and had moved. Whose house did I just search through? It's kind of funny. I think that's happened to me several times where I go up to somebody's house, or I have a really close friend and I accidentally go to the wrong house, but I'm still banging on the door, messing around, assuming that I'm at the right place, and I'm actually not. That's happened to me once or twice. But, the other thing, too, about musicians, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a positive and negative. Because to me, being a musician is something that everybody should do. There's great value in being a musician, just because, being able to create art, it's an emotional thing. It cleanses your brain, keeps you honest, it teaches responsibility, and just feeling that creativity flow through your mind, your body, and your fingers is just an emotion that everyone should feel. So it's kind of sad that musicians have this negative stereotype in society. For instance, what's the difference between a musician and a 14-inch pizza? A 14-inch pizza can feed a family of 4. There were 2 people walking down the street. One was a musician. The other didn't have any money either. So, it's just things like that they're funny, but at the same time, I think everybody should be a musician, and we really should value all the musicians in our lives, just because, what they do is not something that everybody does. And it's kind of sad that they get that stigmatization. great art is incredibly hard to find. At the same time, I encourage everyone to be creative and embrace the art around you. I mean, there's this whole thing against Patreon about how Patreon is just a way for people to beg for money. But I mean, art is free. I mean, art is something that contributes to society, and I think everyone has something to contribute. And it's hard sometimes with the way society is to try to, still maintain your lifestyle while also being an artist. If you don't know what Patreon is basically a site where people can open up a reward system. It's kind of like a 24/7 or an online version of a telethon, where people can, if you donate so much money, you get this. I mean, it's that kind of thing. But anybody can set a Patreon up, so it's really cool. I hope to have one actually for Breece Woodworking at some point and the Creator Podcast, but that'll be a while off. Now, something else that's really cool that I wanted to share with you about making instruments is that when people think of making instruments, there's this whole thing about how it's really hard, it's complicated, it takes a very long time, it's tedious, it's something that nobody wants to do just because of how hard it looks. And I want to say that to get, to make something like a piano or a violin or a guitar work just right, I mean, it does take some work, but I think everyone is capable of doing that. And what's actually is a great example is this village in Paraguay, outside Asunción, which is the capital. It's a very poor town, but it's a village built on garbage. Literally the people who work in that town make money from working at the dump. They acquire plastic, they acquire anything they can sell. I mean, plastic is like 10 cents a pound there. Cardboard is like 5 cents a pound. I mean, this is how people make their money. But in a city that seems so soaked in poverty, so impoverished, a place where you ideally would not want to raise children. What's really cool is that there's a carpenter there who started making instruments out of trash. And you think, well, I mean, when you think of instruments out of trash, you think, putting a rubber band across a cardboard box or banging sticks together. No, that's not it at all. He is making actually high quality instruments. He's making cellos from oil drums. He's making violins from metal tins. Making guitars out of just trash. And it's so cool because this group, there's a whole group in the village of musicians who are working with instruments from the trash. And it's just, it's mind-boggling to imagine someone who's so soaked in poverty, who lacks so many resources and basic education, can do so much with so little. I mean, they're making saxophones with pipes, using metal bottle caps and coins for keys on the saxophone. It's so cool and it's so inspiring. I mean, you just have to check it out. There was a segment on 60 Minutes about this group. They also have a documentary called Landfill Harmonics. That's a funny play on words. But anyway, it's so cool to see how you can combine craftsmanship with musicianship and get a great result. Because I mean, the instruments don't sound half bad. They're excellently made. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing for living in a poor village. And it's definitely inspiring, and it goes to show that music will thrive everywhere and anywhere, and that you don't have to be an expert and you don't have to be someone who's well off to produce music. I mean, you can do anything. You can make an instrument. You can be a piano teacher. You can play a piano yourself. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and this group has really saved this community. I mean, you can see the joy on the kids' faces, and you can see how happy the parents are. One of the parents said in the video that sometimes dreams come true, maybe not in our lives, but through the lives of people we love. And I watched the facial expressions, and I hear what these people said in the video, and the parents and the members of the village. And it's just really inspiring to see people who have nothing really do a big thing. They have a TED Talk. They've toured in Europe and in America. This is a group that didn't ask for recognition, but has definitely received a lot. So definitely a huge shout out to them. Really do hope that inspires you to do something like it inspires me. So I'm going to end with that. Thank you for listening to the first official episode of the Breece Creator Podcast. I'm glad I can share these ideas with you. Hopefully in the future we're going to go on a weekly basis. Each podcast episode is going to have a new topic. It's going to be something that really includes everyone from amateur to expert, from painter to woodworker to metalworker to whatever. There's definitely going to be something in this podcast that appeals to everyone. In the outro of this podcast, I want to feature an artist who has released their music into the public domain. artists who release their music into the public domain, I feel like, understand what art is and how it contributes to the world around it. So I'm going to end the first official episode of the Breece Creator Podcast with Jazz Addict's Intro by Cosmo Fog. They're on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon. I'm sure if you Google them, you'll find them. And just like everything else in this episode, you'll be able to find a link to the song in the show notes, which will be on the Creator Podcast website at breecewoodworking.wixsite.com/creatorpodcast. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Please share the podcast with a buddy and give us any feedback. Like the episode, leave a comment on our website, or send an email to breecewoodworking@gmail.com. You are going to shape this podcast. This podcast is for you. So if you anything that you want to hear, any direction, any features that you want to hear, if you have any ideas for topics or things you want me to touch up on or research, please let me know. I'd love to do an episode because I want this to be a podcast for makers, for creators. So this is supposed to be for you. So do whatever you want. You can also tweet at us by following @Creator Podcast on Twitter. I'm Lee Breece. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on the Breece Creator Podcast.